Today, we're going to be covering how to set the default permissions on the Files tab of an employee item. And the reason we're going to be doing this is to provide a place for employees to view their own files that are pertinent to them, but also to provide a space for human resources to drop any private files that they want to restrict access of the employee to. So what we're going to be doing for the purposes of this demo is we're going to be viewing this employee item that you can see up on my screen, and we're going to be viewing it from the perspective of a human resources user, which is logged into this particular browser. And we're also going to be viewing it from the employee's point of view. So we've got two browsers with two separate users, and they should have separate permissions to the files. So by default, when we create a new employee and we jump into the Files tab, what's happened is a SharePoint folder has been created, and the default permissions are set so that the human resources group have access to it. Normal employees will not be part of the human resources group. So if we drop a file in here as a human resources user, the employee will not have access to that file by default. So if we jump into the employees view and go to the Files tab of that same item, there are currently no items here. So we do want the employee to have access to their own files. And the way that we give them access to this folder, if we jump back through the lens of the human resources user and press this SharePoint button that's sitting in the top right as we view the files, that will take us to the linked SharePoint folder that we're viewing from that employee item. And this is where we need to change the permissions for that folder. So if we jump back one layer into employees, and then we see that my guy's files are sitting here, what we want to do is press these three dots and jump into Manage Access. We want to press this little blue plus button here so that we can grant additional access to this particular employee. So Rapid Support is the employee that we care about in this instance. That is the user that is linked to that employee. And if we press on that and then make sure that instead of Can Edit, we change it to Can View so they can't edit their own files. And I usually select not to notify people, but you can choose to do that. It will just send them an email to say that they've got access to the folder. If we press Grant Access, that's all we need to do at that layer. And now if we go back into here, we can see that the human resources person can still access the file. But if we view it from the perspective of the employee, that file now exists in there as well. So we've covered the first problem, but now we need to provide a space for human resources to put private files for themselves that we do not want the employee to have access to. In order to do that, again, what we do is we jump back into SharePoint. So let's follow that link again. And on this layer, we're going to create a new folder ourselves. So if we press New and Folder, we're going to call it Wojtek Michalek Private Files. Realistically, you can call it whatever you want. That's just the naming convention that I like to use. That's created a folder. And then on this folder, again, we want to go into Manage Access. We need to go into Advanced. And at this layer, what we need to do is press this Stop Inheriting Permissions button, because essentially any folder created within that root employee folder is going to follow the permissions of the employee folder. The employee has access to that, so we need to stop inheriting. Once we do that, we see that Rapid Support is still sitting in here. That's that employee user. We'll just tick them, and we'll say that we want to remove user permissions, and OK. And that is basically everything that we need to do. So if we now back out of that and out of that, and if we just refresh this a little bit, we can see that that folder is now being reflected in the system. If we want to jump in here as the human resources user and upload another file, so again, this is now a private file that I'm dropping in here that I do not want the employee to have access to. We can now see that against this employee item, we have the Files tab. That's showing the individual files that the employee should be able to see, and then a folder where I can drop private files as a human resources user. Now, if we jump back into the employees view, they can only view the root level files. So now we've done everything that we need to do to set up the default permissions at the folder level. We've provided a space for the employee to be able to view their files. So anything from contracts to wage review letters to any other documents that are generated by the system, they will be able to see. But human resources still has a place to put their private files. So now that we've gone through that, you know how to set default permissions on an employee.